Hello, my name is Scott Swanson. Julie is away at a conference this week, so I am your host for today's Field to Fork webinar. Field to Fork is brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension. We are so glad you have joined us today for our ninth week in this year's series, and a special welcome for everybody who's joining from a watch party. We're celebrating a milestone here in 2025. This is our 10th year we have done the series. We have reached thousands of people with information about growing, preparing, and preserving fruits and vegetables, along with best practices for food entrepreneurs. We've archived all of our more than 100 webinars from the previous years, and those links are on the Field to Fork webinar page. The next slide shows the upcoming webinars. We hope you're able to join us here for the next week. So the next slide shows the webinar controls. Because of our large number of participants, we invite you to post your questions and comments in the chat. So go ahead and practice finding that right now. Please ignore the Q&A box. Just go ahead and click the chat button to open that, and go ahead and type your city and state in. And why don't you give us your current outdoor temperature? I know I'm sure plenty of places in North Dakota, Minnesota are feeling a lot warmer today than they were yesterday or heck, over the last week. We know that. The next slide provides an acknowledgement. So while you're working on getting your name and city and state and in there, and we have a special request. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. So we ask that you complete a short online survey that we will email to you right after today's webinar. And as a thank you, prizes will be awarded to the lucky winners of the random drawings. So be sure to put your complete address on the form, including your city, state, and zip code, and make sure you scroll down on that form to find to today's date. So again, welcome to today's webinar. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Harlene Hatterman Valenti was born in northeast Nebraska, and she was raised on a crop and animal farm. She came to NDSU in 2000 as an assistant professor in the High Value Crops Project, so she has spent more time in North Dakota now than in Nebraska. So she has conducted research on approximately 20 different crops, but allium crops have been most predominant throughout her 23 plus years at NDSU. Harlene, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you. Actually, I'm on year 25. So, um, and unfortunately, alliums aren't even in this picture, but I'm going to talk about all kinds of alliums. In addition, I have a few more I added to, in addition to the title. So, well, first of all, I want to go and I saw this online. I was like, oh, Iowa State. That's wonderful because I got my PhD at Iowa State. And so a little shout out to all those. Um, and I'll try to go and when there's some big differences, or if I'm mainly talking about North Dakota, I'll try to make sure I explain that for everyone. So, for alliums, there are really three major groups, um, or I guess in the onion world. You have the Cepa group, which is your common onion, and where you get a bulb from that forms from from a seed, and they are true seeds. You got your aggregatum group, which is like aggregates. So shallots, for example, you get multiple um, bulbs or shoots. And then they're generally much easier to propagate by vegetative means, just because you got multiple of those, and some of them are smaller, so you can just go in and utilize those. And lastly is this proliferous group, which is the tree onions, which is the picture that you see there, um, and which is the one I'm not going to talk about. So, okay. Whoops, going too fast. So these are the ones I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about culinary alliums, starting out with chives, and then going all the way down to shallots. Um, Two other ones that I'm not going to talk about because um, I'm not sure that they're actually hardy enough to that if we went and planted them, we'd have enough. But elephant garlic, which is related to leeks, not really true garlic, and then soft neck garlic. And there's soft neck garlic and hard neck garlic. And hard neck garlic is the more hardy, cold hardy, winter hardy. And that's the one that we've um, really done any experiments with. And you can see they're all alliums, but they all have some different names. So let's get into these. Some of the basics, let's so that we're all, why are alliums really important? So they are a cool season plant and they're herbaceous, so they'll die down to the ground um, and come back. Uh, Most of them are biennial, so we use them as annuals, a lot of them. But what happens is when they get that cold period after they have enough growth, that will initiate the flowering. So if you were an onion seed producer in the Pacific Northwest, you'd grow your plants and then you'd have your winter come, and then your second year it would go and put up a seed stock with flowers. They are very shallow fibrous roots that come from a basal plate, and I'll show you that in the next slide. And to go and trigger bulb initiation, it's a combination of day length and temperatures. And day length, moreover, on most of them than the temperatures, but you can kind of trick them by doing some things with temperature fluctuations. Uh, the size of your bulb all depends on how many leaves have been have emerged by the time bulb initiation starts. So you can understand when we get into something like garlic and where you can go and plant that in the fall or in the spring, why you would get larger garlic if you planted it in the fall versus the spring, especially in a place like North Dakota where we only have 200 and some uh, no. Well, we have a very short growing season of 130 some days from our last spring frost to our first fall freeze. So you can understand having that short growing season is really um, important on something like that with bulb size. There are a lot of medicinal values that are in alliums. They come primarily from the sulfur compounds, allicin, for example, um, and the polyphenolics. And so, with those compounds, you can get antimicrobial activity, antifungal activity, high antiplatelet activity, when you eat those raw, and then anti-inflammatory activities. So really have a lot of medicinal uses. So here I put both an onion and a clove so that you can, because when you think about or a bulb of garlic, when you think about garlic, you're going, well, are they really the same? They don't really appear to be the same. But by putting these two together, I think you see how similar they are and why they're both alliums. So I'm going to see if I don't know if you can see um, my little arrow. Here is this basal plate that I had mentioned that this is where all the roots form from. And you can see here is the basal plate of this bulb of garlic, and each one of these are then a clove. And then here is the new basal plate that is coming on um, for the new one. So this is for example, a bulb that had been harvested minus the one picture that would cover it up. Um, in onions, these each are the fleshy base of a leaf. So they're called modified leaves because this actually would go up and be a leaf. And each leaf comes from the middle. So the outside is the oldest, and these then dry down and they become this, what they call a tunic, um, to kind of protect the fleshy uh, leaves underneath or those so that they don't dry out. And you can see how cloves also have the tunic. Um, they also emerge, that leaves keep emerging from the center, but then it works a little bit different because um, it then forms each of these cloves and multiple cloves. Okay. So the first ones we're going to talk about are chives versus garlic chives. And these already are the first two that they're perennials. They're not annuals or biennials that we grow as annuals. So I figured I'd get them out of the way right away. Chives can also be called onion chives, and that's because they have more of that onion flavor and aroma in comparison to the garlic chives, which have more of a garlic taste and aroma. So how are we going to tell these apart? You see the picture there on your right. So onion chives or regular chives have hollow and cylindrical leaves. So of course, by you looking at this, you're like, well, I these do look circular and round in comparison, and they're much smaller. Um, and so these are your regular chives, and I'm sure if in many of you probably would have guessed that right away. Um, and they're used in all kinds of as a garnish or in as flavoring for a lot of dishes, especially your mashed potato. You have a sour cream and chives, and they produce a pinkish purple flower. Now, when we look at garlic chives, much different. They have that flat, and you can tell from looking at this picture that, this leaf is flat and rather solid. They have that mild garlic flavor. Um, and actually, I also teach herbaceous ornamentals, and we use garlic chives is included as an herbaceous ornamental, and that's because it produces a really pretty, they have star-shaped flowers, but they're in that umbel like you see for um, most alliums, um, and they're really hardy. So they and they flower later in the season versus your chives will flower earlier in the seasons. But a lot of these are used in, as you can see here, as more of a flavoring in a meal. Excuse me. So I saw this on the net. I'm gonna get a drink. And anyway, they were advertising their garlic chives. They said, if you haven't tried garlic chives, maybe grab some this week and give them a try and let us know how you like them. And they went and they were talking about how they put them with their asparagus. And I'm looking at that and I was like, well, why did they put chive flowers on there if they're talking about garlic chives? So it was kind of strange. So I'm not sure they know the difference between garlic chives and onion chives. But so those are our first two. The next ones that we're going to talk about is shallots. And when you look at shallots, you think, oh, they look just like a oblong onion, and you can get onions to be more oblong by how you plant that seed. The deeper you plant it, the more oval and oblong it would get, unless you plant it too deep and then it won't come up. But anyways, but as I said earlier, these shallots, they grow in clusters. Almost all the pictures you see, you always see them as individuals, and you don't see them as in this cluster. Um, Most of them are that oblong, but they can vary in their shape, and I've seen that as well. But they only come in that one flavor, which is much more milder than most of the onions we are familiar with. They also are known to have more vitamin A and may have more magnesium. And I'm going to leave the onions alone because those will come to next time, a little bit later here. So here's actually a picture of a shallot growing, and you can see how they would might call them bunching uh, group because there's multiple ones there. Um, so in North Dakota, well, even in Iowa too, you would go and if you had sets, you would go and plant those as early as you can because they really do take quite some time to go and mature to that stage. If you're going to use seeds, and that'd be the only, I mean, you could probably get transplants. I think Johnny's sells shallot transplants, but there's not very many places that would sell transplants. But you could get seeds started. And with seeds, you want to get those started about 8 to 10 weeks before you expect to go and plant them into your garden, which would be before that last expected frost. They do like a coarser soil in comparison to we're in Fargo, we're in a very clay soil. So if you are trying to go and want to grow these in Fargo, area, you'd probably be much better off if you try to grow them in a raised bed where you can go and amend that soil and use something else besides the Fargo clay. Because they bunch like that, you're going to want to plant them about 6 inches apart and in 8 to 12 inch rows separations. If you want just a smaller but a single bulb, you would go and plant them at a 2 inch spacing. Um, and then you'll end up getting more of that just one oblong bulb. As far as water, about an inch a week, and that's pretty much true for almost all alliums. Um, a little bit more uh, may be good during that bulbing phase because they'll need maybe an inch and a half later on in the season. And they really, as I said, need quite a long time. In fact, one example, so I tried these. I have some raised beds, and I tried some, and they didn't really grow too much. I don't take very good care of my garden. I'm busy having huge research plots that are my big gardens at work. And so my garden at home kind of suffers. But anyway, they kind of died down. I completely forgot about them. And then the following year, all of a sudden I saw some green leaves come up and I was like, what? Oh yeah, I had planted these shallots. And actually they did pretty well the second year. I only got uh, two or three, not nearly what you see here, but it was uh, it was my first real experience with shallots. As far as harvest, when just like onions, when the tops start to fall over because that neck part gets soft, you can go and dig them up, and then you'll want to cure them for a while, 2 to 7 days, they say, in a well ventilated but um, um, kind of protected location, because who knows, you don't, definitely what you don't want to have happen is that you have them laying out and you get a frost. Onions are pretty good with low temperatures below freezing. Um, you could probably get down to about 19 degrees or 20, let's go 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And as long as you don't touch them until it warms up, they'll be fine. If if they're laying on top of the soil and the roots aren't in the soil and they're not still, then they're going to be toast. That you'll have mush. So, okay. Our next one is scallions. I gotta make sure I watch out with time because I kind of get off on stories and lose track of time. So, scallions are also known as green onions, and they're the ones you see in the store where they you can go and cut the greens as well as that little part of what would be a bulb if they would ever bulb. They, despite any kind of day length triggering or temperature fluctuation, they won't go and form a bulb. Now, you can use other onions for green onions or for scallions because you can just pick them before that bulb gets that big. Um, but true green onions, you never have to worry about those problems of bulbing. And then you would also, the whole difference with that is how close you plant them together. So usually you'll go and plant these in the spring. You can put them in a 2 to 4 inch band and then have a half inch between your seeds, or you can go in a single row. Um, I- I'm always desperate for space, and so I would I would always put them in a band, and then you can go and if one's growing bigger than the others, you can kind of um, pull those out and eat those. And by maybe planting them a little bit or seeding them a little bit thicker, you're able to go and do something like that and have then green onions over a period of time versus all at once, which um, and again, here the same thing about the soil and the water. And as far as harvesting, you could go and if you had them in a row, you could just dig up a whole bunch, or you can go and if you only need a couple for some recipe, then just pull up a couple of those. And they come, you can see this one's more of a like your red onion, or purplish color, but they also, most of them you see in the grocery store um, are are the white ones. Okay. Growing leeks. I can, um, I actually have just a couple years experience on growing leeks, and I don't know why I haven't tried them um, sooner because uh, they're, well, maybe because I thought I needed a big, huge space for them. Uh, you can see there's a lot of variation in the cultivars. I looked at just a couple of seed catalogs, and you could go from 75 days until they mature from planting or transplanting um, to when they you could harvest them to 120 days. So there's a lot of variation there. With these, they grow faster than shallots. You only need about 8 weeks before that last expected frost to sow those seeds. Then when you're ready to go and plant them in the ground, I think this is the part that scares a lot of people, but it isn't that much work. You make a trench about a foot deep and you know, whatever's easiest for you to slowly fill in the soil. It says about 6 inches wide, but you could make it wider if that you know, is possible and you have the space. The biggest problem on that is where to put the soil and then have your next row if you need more than one row. Um, and basically what you do is you set those seedlings 4 to 6 inches apart. You put enough soil back in there so that um, they they stand up. You water them, and then as the season goes on, you just slowly start filling that soil back in because what you can see all this white along here, this has all been filled in with soil. And then this part probably more out of the soil. So you just slowly start filling it back in. Uh, Same thing is done with a lot of times celery as well, but maybe not as much. And and so by the end of June, you want to have that ground level, and then they'll just continue to grow. You can harvest them whenever you want. They really store quite well, quite a long time. I think I probably overdid it. I had them in the refrigerator more than several weeks, probably a couple months, and they still uh, were quite well. The outer layer of that skin, you might need to go and that might have dried up a little bit, but and they store better if the colder the temperature because that's going to have the less amount of moisture that you're going to lose. But leeks are, I mean, it's a very mild onion taste, not near as strong and definitely won't make your eyes water like your dry bulb onions would. Okay, so growing garlic. Um, as I said, we grow the hardneck types, but garlic, then they have groupings of hard necks. They have groupings of soft necks. So you can see the 8 different types of grouping. And I haven't really been able to find out what's the main differences with all these groupings that they have these multiple groupings. It kind of makes sense. The purple stripe ones have these, like you can see here, purple stripes in the bulbs. Um, Marbled purple stripes kind of make sense. Glazed purple stripes. The porcelain, they have a very thin, almost clear wrap to them. Uh, but so there's a number of different groups, but when you go and you're buying your seed, basically you're going by what the cultivar is, not necessarily what the group is. As far as the soil type, you can see again, uh, they don't do well on heavy clay soils, um, primarily because of that drainage, and that's because you're going to plant those in the fall. I had a grad student. He just finished up his research Oh, it was Julie and I on this project, and Julie was also a committee member, and we looked at three different planting dates. We went from the end of September, mid-October, and the end of October. And we did it at two locations. We did it at our horticulture research farm, which is more of a sandy loam. And then our other site was in that Fargo clay uh, near campus. And what we found was, and then we had six different cultivars, but they were the best cultivars from the variety trial. And what we found for most of them is that the when we were in the sandy loam soil, we had our biggest bulbs end up the earlier planting, the September 28th planting. Uh, and then the poorest was at that same site. The smallest ones were at that same site that were planted in October 28th. So a month later. The ones that were in the Fargo clay were kind of in the middle. They weren't the best, they weren't the worst. And I think that's because of the soil and how temperature can influence and fluctuate so much more in a sandy loam than in um, a Fargo clay, as well as some other environmental conditions. I thought that was really interesting. Now, a lot of places say you could go from anywhere from um, Labor Day until the end of October, or even maybe a little bit later if but you want to do it a few weeks. You don't want to wait until you get a hard freeze, because what you're doing is you're planting these cloves, the root end down. So this is the that basal plate, and so that will be stuck into the ground. And and what you're wanting is you want enough time for the roots to form before the the plant will go dormant. You don't want enough time so that the roots grow and leaves and that leaves penetrate the soil, because they will probably freeze off and die back. So you don't want that clove to put energy into enough time that it put energy into those leaves and then they die, because that's going to set it back. So, but you want it early enough so that you get really good root development, because then when they receive this cold winter temperature, that vernalizes them and initiates more of that top growth and gets them actually to make those cloves or that bulb. If they didn't get that vernalization, they wouldn't make the cloves or the bulb. Um, so, what you also need to make sure is after you get that really hard freeze, and before that ground really, really freezes up, you want to put 3 to 4 inches of mulch. It could be leaves, it could be straw. We just use straw. Um, and and that's to help protect them so that they don't go and have, well, I've seen where they've just get too cold and with the moisture, and then they just rot. So by having that mulch layer, you're able to go and help them get through even the cold North Dakota winters. So in the spring, you'll pull off that straw so the soil warms up, so they'll come out of the ground. And then the sooner they come out of the ground, and that occurs because they have that well-developed root system, the faster they will grow. And then again, um, the more leaves they will produce and the larger the bulb and the cloves will get. Some of the number of cloves is genetically controlled. So if, for example, we had a German white and it was a lot, it was about the size of not quite a baseball, but it only had four cloves. Each one of those cloves was almost the size of it seemed like a ping pong ball or a little bit smaller. Um, they were just really huge in comparison. Versus with your soft neck ones, they make a lot more cloves, and but they store a lot longer. So those are the ones you see in the grocery store. The hard neck don't store as long. Where am I? Oh, okay. Um, so then hardnecks also they produce this scape, and I should have put a picture with it. Um, what it looks like is a flowering, like your onions are flowering, and so when that scape starts to curl, you cut it off, and it's important that you remove that because um, it will put out these little bulbules at the end of that, and you don't want it to do that. But I have seen at farmers market and other places where they actually sell the scapes because they have that mild garlic flavor to them, and are quite nice. I've also just gone and cut up the scapes and sautéed them. Excellent. Um, but it's important that you cut those scapes off just when they start to curl. You don't want to let them go too long because the longer you let that, the the more you're taking away energy and nutrition from the bulb and those cloves. But you might as well not cut them off right away the minute they're trying to come out because they're very good and edible. Okay, so harvest comes in when you start to see 3 to 5 leaves turn brown. It's not that the stem's going to fall over like onions. You just see 3 to 5, and this usually occurs later in July. So, and it's very important that you don't wait too long because all of a sudden you're not going to see where they are. And the longer that they stay in the soil after they're mature, the more likely they are going to start to sprout again. So, and you can see cure 2 to 3 weeks in warm, shady place, good air circulation. Okay. Yeah, I better get going. So this is, I think, the last of it, onions, but there's a lot to talk about with onions. And first of all, I wanted to go and make sure that everyone um, understood that the formation of these storage organs, be it a modified stem or a modified leaf in the case of onions, all respond to a photoperiod. So you could see carrots, beets, turnips, and radishes, they're day neutral. So they by day neutral, that means when the plant will just start to go and form that those storage organs. They don't have to have a certain amount of day length to trigger that. On the other hand, most of your onions and your garlic are long days. That means they need long days or short nights to initiate that bulbing to occur. And then potatoes, sweet potatoes, and yams are short day. So they need the long night to initiate. And thus, we see that occurring after the summer solstice, and I'll explain a little bit more on day length in a little bit. And that's just a little picture that kind of talks about the same thing. Okay, onions also are grouped just like garlic. You have all these groupings you can buy, if they're American or European. Now we have the F1 hybrids, which the other ones were open pollinated. These now they're making the specific cross, so you get more vigor and a lot more uniformity with those. There's classified, of course, you have the red, the whites, the yellows, or by if they're mild to pungent, and by shapes. And lastly, by photoperiod, which you're saying, wait, you just told me they're long days causing the bulbing. Well, they're long days, but within the long days, they brought them into short day, intermediate day, and long days. And you can see 12 to 13 hours for the short days, which really is still a long day, but just must be taxonomist trying to find a way to keep it something new. Intermediate days have 13 to 14 hours, and long days are the 14 to 16 hours. And that's when bulbing is initiated. One more thing to note, which you can see there, is those short and intermediate day cultivars really require a long season to grow. So 180 days, we don't have that in North Dakota. So even if we were to try those, it won't work. So here's a little bit of more explanation of the short day onions, some examples. They have a much more mild flavor. You'll find those in the store a lot more. Um, Vidalias, for example, but they don't store near as well as the long day ones. Here's those intermediate day ones, um, and they don't tend to get as large as your long day ones. And then here are your long day ones. And you see Walla Walla, and you're going, wait, Walla Walla is not a pungent one. That's more like your mild. And that, we couldn't really get Walla Wallas to go and grow the size that you see there just because of the fact that we don't have a long enough season. I remember there was a grower down in southern part of North Dakota. He planted his in the fall so that they would get big enough to go and uh, have a large bulbs in the summer or by the end of the next season. Because you're thinking of Walla Walla, Washington. Well, heck, um, they're out there first part of March seeding their onion, and they can go um, into November plus without having any kind of a hard freeze. So they have a much longer season than we do. But anyway, the grower um, had it work 1 year when he got enough um, of a snow cover to protect them. And then the second year it was rather open, and he didn't. The second time he tried it, that fall it was and winter was rather open, and that was a disaster. So um, most of the ones that we're growing in North Dakota are, more of the yellow, long, long, and more pungent. They're very good at storing, but so the next part is okay. Do you go seed? Do you grow sets? And sets are already available in the stores. I've seen that. Um, and for a homeowner, sets are probably the easiest because if you are going to go with seeds, uh, You need to get those seeds out there really as well as early as you can. Sets, as you can see here, they give you your 3 to 4 weeks earlier with sets than with seed. The thing is, you have to make sure that you use sets that are less than a half inch in diameter. And the reason for that is when they're over, or if they're over a half inch in diameter, when they're shipping these around, they're keeping them in coolers so that they don't, so that they can protect them and that they don't start growing and all that kind of stuff. Well, if they're larger than a half inch, they probably have more than 5 leaves, which gets them beyond the juvenile stage. So then that biennial kicks in, and they're going to most likely, with the cool temperatures that they're stored in when shipping, let alone when you're going to be planting them out, they're more likely to go and bolt. And that's not what you want if you want a large onion. So you can use those larger ones, but pick them before they bolt and use them for green onions. Okay, I'm going to zing. This is a lot just like what we were talking about for the last, about all these other ones as far as water and fertilizer. You can see for the long day onions why North Dakota were definitely long day. You can get away with some of these intermediates if you're in these southern states or more southern states, but for the short days, you can see why um, most of those cultivars are called Texas something, and that's why. Okay, this is why we need to go and get those plants in the ground as early as possible if we're seeding or if we're planting sets. The sooner you get them into the ground, the better off you are as well. Um, as you can see, by May 11th, we're at 15 hours of sun uh, day length. So May 11th, if we only got our plants seeded May 1st, um, we don't 11 days for them to come up and produce leaves. And as I said earlier, as many leaves that are emerged at the time when they get that trigger to go and start bulb initiation, that sets the size of that onion. So if if you plant late and they barely come out of the ground and you get your 15, we you can see how much time we get in about a month. Now, and then we're going to, well, here we wouldn't get that long because June 20th is going to be the summer solstice, and then we're going to go back to shorter days. But you can see where we're almost at 16 hours, and they're from 14 to 16 hours for that triggering of the bulb initiation. Why do my onions flower? I think I've really talked about that enough. I'm going to kind of zip over that. But definitely, if if they bolt, you're not going to get a large onion. And one of the last things then is um, I remember uh, Tom Kolb in Bismarck had a thing on how do I grow giant onions, and he said, "Well, of course, you have to start with um, this Ulsa Craig, and it's known for how large of onions it produces. But also, and it's a really, really old, came from, I think, somewhere in Ireland or something like that. But I mean, a 6 pound onion would be pretty amazing. But they're known for this cultivar is known for its large size. You want to space it bigger. instead of 4 inches like you would for a regular onion. You want to give it 6 inch spacing. Um, but it isn't ideal for any kind of storage, best used fresh. And I liked what the guy on the bottom picture. I do the same thing when I have fish. If I caught a fish, to make it look bigger, you just put it out in front of you, and it makes it look that much larger. So they are large, but you can get colossal onions for almost any of these yellow onions that I've seen growers in North Dakota get a number of large onions from just seeding early enough. But with that, I think here is the last couple of slides that Julie wanted me to include. And then, yeah, her little calendar. And hopefully, I've left enough time for some questions.
Yes, we do have some time for some questions, and there are a lot that have come in, Harlene. So I will get going on asking them and see how many we can get through.
Perfect.
So first one here, are ornamental chives edible?
Yes. So that garlic chives, which I also use as an ornamental, it is edible. And
All right.
so both of those chives are edible.
Sounds good. And another ornamental one, can ornamental allium be trimmed back? This person put them in a pot because they received them too late to plant last fall, and now they're spindly.
Yeah. So, um, but there's a bunch of ornamental alliums. You have your giant one, you have your alliums that have this giant, very, I mean, that's what they're known for, the giant umbel of purple flowers. Um, So if it's an ornamental, it's a perennial. So you can definitely go and that cutting them back, they might be spindly, they might take a little bit longer, but they should do they should do okay. Just I get them in the ground.
There you go. Is there a way to keep chives from blooming and going to seed?
um, well, I suppose if you consistently cut them off and the leaves, you could probably keep them from flowering. But they want to flower.
All right. Are shallots also called bunching onions?
Yes.
Okay, figured that'd be an easy one.
Well, yes, yes. They're in this bunching group. Yes, they could be also called bunching onions.
Okay. Now this one was asked earlier, so maybe you brought up in your topic, or maybe you hit it at some point. But how do you know when each is in the bulbing phase?
Yes. That's a difficult, I mean, it isn't like, oh, boom, you look at it and you know it's in the bulbing phase. Um, you just have to figure that when you get around 14 hours or a little bit over 14 hours with onions, long day onions, you're going to go and get into that bulb initiation stage. So you want to be able to have them as large as possible by that time. And knowing where where you live and when you get to those 14 plus hours is really important. Um, as you can see, you go into Iowa, you're not going to get there that and as much as we're going to. So it'll vary a little bit more. Also, with garlic, that again, they initiate rather again long days. So the more you get growth on them, the better off you are. So again, long days, garlic and onions. So anytime you're 14 hours or more, we'll go and initiate those kind of responses.
Sounds good. So this person has started onions from seed And so they're wondering what should the air and soil temperature be when transplanting in the garden?
Well, they're a cool season, but I mean, they're still going to be rather fragile to frost. So I would wait until that last day of any kind of expected frost. Um, if you put them out there a little bit sooner, um, hopefully you have some way of covering them up to kind of protect those leaves. But really, they're a cool season plant. So you could get them out there, um, same that you would with broccoli.
Another one about transplanting here. So how early can you transplant long day onions?
I think if the ground is workable, I would probably get them out there.
Okay, we've got two here on planting in the spring. So one wanting to know, kind of both of them, I guess, your opinion on planting spring garlic varieties in North Dakota.
Well, okay. I mean, you can do it, but you have to go and have kept them in the refrigerator for a number of weeks to vernalize them. And then you'll need to get them out there as soon as you can, and don't expect to have really large bulbs though, because that clove has to start to produce roots before it can go and then send up that shoot and the leaves. So the other ones that you plant in the fall have, what, 4, maybe 6 weeks of going and the opportunity to start to form roots. And it isn't like instantaneous. It's going to take a week for even that initiation of those roots to get going. So um, it's just you won't get as large of cloves or bulb, but you can do it in the spring. You just got to make sure they're vernalized.
Um, can you use row cover to control weeds with the alliums?
Row covers. I'm not sure what they mean by row covers to control weeds, but with the garlic, what we do is we'll pull that straw apart off so the ground warms up and they'll pop up as soon as possible, and then we put the straw back to help with the weed control.
Okay, they typed in quick, they said plastic mulch.
Ooh, I've never seen that happen. Um, I guess you could try that. I just have never seen anyone try to. You would then use transplants. You'd make sure that your hole is big enough. It's very
Yeah,
possible.
they said they tried it with leeks
Oh,
and they were really small.
okay. But with the leaks, the difficult part with that is, you want to fill back that soil, and do you then put your mulch over in in June when you finally have that soil pulled back or filled in? That would be difficult. But you know, a a mulch is going to help, or plastic mulch, anything to go and keep the sunlight from hitting those seeds, or provide that they shade out, and the seeds, even if they germinate, can't get light and thus die. So a plastic mulch definitely does a good job of controlling weeds. I just don't know if that would be the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. Sticking with the mulch here, this person was wondering, they planted garlic last fall. How early here this spring should they uncover the mulch from them? Too early or too late?
Nope.
Is there too early, too late?
I think if the snow is gone, um, we went out, we pulled it back probably a couple weeks ago. And I know somebody already told me that they had garlic up about like this. So about 2 inches.
All right, we just got a couple more, so we're going to try to get through them real quick here. What types of amendments would you recommend for heavy clay soil?
Ah, um, organic matter. I think if you can get compost, that will help a lot.
Okay.
And so,
Two more here. How long can you store garlic scabes? If I said that right, scabes.
oh yeah, um, that's a good question. They really store for in the refrigerator in a plastic bag, quite a long time, several weeks.
All right. Do you have any specific times that you can fertilize garlic and onion?
So, um, we'll fertilize pre-plant, and then we'll go and give them. And I think that was on the slide. Every couple of weeks, some more fertilizer. With onions, you want you that last month or two, you don't want to fertilize because you don't want the necks to get really thick. Um, then they tend to get a lot of disease problems with that. So, but garlic, um, not so much. You probably, though, several weeks before you expect the leaves to start turning yellow and then brown, you'd want to stop fertilizing.
All right. Well, that was it for the questions. Plus, we're over time a little bit here, anyways. A lot of good, lot of comments in there too.
Well, perfect. Really
All right.
enjoyed giving the presentation.
Yep. Thanks so much, Harlene. Thanks everybody for joining us. Remember, next week we got one, and then we're off for a week after that, and then I think two more after that before we wrap up for the year. So, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see everybody next Wednesday.